Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining FSMA Friday for September 25th, 2020. Fall is here. Welcome. My name is Aaron Bolshaw, the VP of Marketing for SafetyChain and today's moderator for FSMA Fridays. For anyone that's new, FSMA Friday is an ongoing monthly industry update for food and beverage facility operators, QA, safety and compliance professionals, and we partner with the fine folks at the Atchison Group to bring you these presentations on a whole host of topics and make sure everyone's updated on what's new and what's happening. Today's presentation is packed with tons of information about the new Canadian nutrition labeling requirements. So we will be seeing our packages changing. So before we get into that, just a little bit of housekeeping. We are scheduled for a half hour today. However, we think it might go a little long, so hang out if you have some questions. We'll be staying on a little after that to make sure everyone's got good information. You can get back and have a restful weekend. So everyone's on mute. So to give us those questions, use that presentation panel on the right side of your screen. We'll get to them at the end of the presentation. And we have been noticing this week a little bit of latency between the slides and stuff. I think just everyone's doing a lot of at-home Wi-Fi with current conditions. So please bear with us as we change slides, and it might take a little bit to catch up on your screen. So you can always watch prior FSMA recordings at SafetyChain.com, and resources. And at the end of this presentation, we'll give you a couple other places to go grab some more resources, especially over on TAG's website. So with that, I just want to introduce today's presenter, Cameron Prince. He's the VP of Regulatory Affairs at the Atchison Group, and a highly decorated and experienced food safety consultant, lots of years in overseeing regulatory programs both in the U.S. and Canada. So he's got his fingerprint on both above the border and below. So, and a lot of experience Cameron has with in Codex, WTO, and SPS committees. Think about regulatory affairs. He's the guy in the committee rooms. So, Cameron, welcome, and thank you for joining FSMA Friday today.
Well, thank you very much, Aaron. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So it seems like just yesterday. Yeah, it seems like just yesterday we were going back to school, and now it's fall. It's like time's evaporating. But this week, very recently, we saw the new proposed rule about traceability come out. I think it was a day or two ago now. But before we get into the Canadian nutrition labeling, which is what we have teed up, why don't you take us through a little bit, at that high level, what we know about the proposed rule about traceability of foods?
Well, thanks, Aaron. Yeah, before we get into the Canadian nutritional labeling, these FSMA Fridays, we always like to do an update on the latest things with the Food and Drug and FSMA related. And we have got a few things this week. The big one, as Aaron indicated, is of the proposed rules on advanced traceability of foods. And this goes back to when the legislation, the Food Safety Modernization Act of 2011, 2012, and in that piece of legislation, authority and instruction was given to FDA to create advanced traceability of foods rules. So the power is there. At the time, there was a fair bit of controversy over that because of what foods would be under that rule, and it wasn't so much resistance to the actual traceability measures at the time. It was more about, well, is my food on the list, and the costs associated with it. So it's taken a while for FDA to get to this point. And of course, Frank Yanis is there now, and this is an area where he's very keen to see progress. So the rule has come out. It's not the rule has come out, it's proposed rules come out. That's an important distinction. There will be consultations over the next year on this. And just a quick overview of what it's about, that enhanced traceability is required for the list of foods that you see on your right: cheeses, shell eggs, nut butters, etc., cucumbers, a lot of fresh produce type products, and fish and seafood as well. And these are foods where there's been previous high risk. They've been identified as high risk foods, although the FDA isn't using that term high risk. They talk about foods requiring advanced traceability, or FTLs. And so what they're trying to do is have this enhanced traceability so that if there is an outbreak or recalls, that they can be assured that the information is available quickly and that recalls and product withdrawals can take place rapidly and in an organized way, which gets dangerous food off the shelves in a hurry, tries to avoid repeat recalls, which can be really damaging. And so it's all a good idea. The tricky part is going to be the identification of which foods are included. So that is something that we look forward to. There are little pieces of jargon that come with this, key data elements. These are things that need to be collected. So this is all about information systems and making sure that these key data elements for traceability are there. Another term is critical tracking events. So these are things like growing from the field, receiving at a food plant. So these are terms that you'll become familiar with as this rule gets discussed more and more. The compliance date they're looking at 2 years for these record-keeping requirements to be in place after the final rule is in place. So there's some time before this all comes into effect. TAG and others will be putting out a newsletter on this next week. Food defense, one of the new developments is that FDA is now allowing remote training sessions for intentional adulteration and vulnerability assessments, and they weren't allowing that before, and now that can be done. And since most companies are going to need to take this training, this is good news, and it'll facilitate this in this kind of COVID era that we're in. And trainers are available at TAG and other companies to get this done. And enforcement of food defense, you may have heard or experienced what the FDA calls quick checks, and that's where they'll come in and see where you are in terms of compliance with the food defense rule. They're meant to be educational, and they had originally said that they will continue for 2 years, but now they're saying for an indefinite period until they're satisfied that the levels of compliance have come up to an acceptable level. And just a quick note on the Foreign Supplier Verification Program, FSVP. We've noticed in our practice that a number of clients have been receiving notices of noncompliance, or not so much more warnings, not official enforcement actions, but warnings about compliance. So they are starting to ramp up on enforcement of FSVP, which affects quite a few companies in the U.S. Okay, so Aaron, that's for the FSMA update.
That's the recap, huh? Yeah, it seems like it seems like there's a lot of thought behind the foods that they're targeting here. You said it, Cameron. These are higher risk foods, so that's good. If I just take a step back, if I can, there's just a lot of complexity going on. I like to see that there's more allowances for remote operations, such as training, audit, certification, stuff like that. Even from the GFSI side, I just think this is all a natural step towards coping, right, with COVID and how we have to keep food safe. So these are all good things, and I just want to plug Dr. Atchison very quickly. He'll be joining SafetyChain at our virtual customer summit in October, talking about 2021 and how this complexity really it's not going to get less complex. So we got to be on our toes, and we got to be looking towards the future. So so we're here to talk about the Canadian nutrition labeling, though. So we're going to go through 5 parts here, and then I already see some really great questions coming in, Cameron, so we'll get to those at the end. But why don't you take us through just kind of the introduction of this and why it's being updated?
Yeah, okay. So the Canadian government was, in terms of health policy, has been talking about this and looking at this for a long time, and looking at issues such as cardiovascular disease, which is increasing, stroke, obesity, high blood pressure, all those ills of modern society that we face in the developed world. And there's been a lot of improved science take place, and linking diet and public health. We're much more knowledgeable than we were 20 years ago. And that was the last time that these rules were looked at and this nutrition panel was looked at. So bottom line, it was time to have a revamp of everything. So that is what Health Canada has decided to do. They have already had quite a bit of consultation around this in Canada. Actually, some U.S. companies have been involved in those consultations, and so it affects anybody that's obviously anybody shipping food into Canada from the U.S. Needs to be on top of all of these developments, and actually some companies have been very proactive in that regard, which is great. And people have changed how they eat, and that's another factor here. Health Canada has looked at calorie intake, serving sizes, how people eat, what they eat. It's all changed, and these are the drivers for these policy changes that are taking place. They really are about informing the public much more than in the past. So much more educated consumers, I think, is another huge factor in this. So I think we could move on to the next slide there, Aaron.
You bet.
There we go. Okay, just a bit of background. These rules come under, you hear in Canada, the Safe Food for Canadians regulations, and that is the big news, and that's the big change in Canada, and biggest change in food regulatory for many years. These rules about food labeling and nutritional labeling come under a separate act, which is administered by Health Canada, not the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. It's the Food and Drugs Act and Regulations, and it's very similar to the Food, Drugs, and Cosmetics Act in the U.S. So the Food Drugs Act has a food portion. It also has medical devices and drugs and so on, but this is the regulations around food. And so food policy at a high level in Canada is driven under these acts and regulations. So it gets a little confusing about jurisdiction, and I'll talk about a bit more about that. So that act and regulation gives the Canadian Food Inspection Agency and Health Canada the authority to create nutrition labeling. It requires disclosure of certain nutrients. It creates guidelines for voluntary disclosures of nutrient and health claims, and it's based on a total daily diet. So we can move to the next one. Okay, this slide's called New Rules, and it's just to go a bit further with what I was just talking about. So you've all heard about Safe Food for Canadians regulations, and they came in at first in January of 2018. The first phase came in, and in 2020 we are now looking at the last major phase is kicking in this year. So those regulations are under the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, and they require every food business, importers, manufacturers to be licensed and have a equivalent to a FSMA preventive controls. It's slightly different, but you have to have essentially a HACCP type preventive control system. And there's a lot of rules around traceability have also been introduced there. So that's in place now. It started off for traditional commodities, meat, fish, dairy, etc., back in 2018. And then this year for the remainder of foods, which is like cereals, confections, baked goods, etc. Most foods actually, it was to come into effect on July of this year. And I'll talk a bit more later in the presentation about the enforcement of that. Now, the reason I mention those regulations in the context of Health Canada's nutritional labeling is that the enforcement of labeling is done by CFIA. The rules are made by Health Canada, but CFIA that you're dealing with when you have to comply or meet an inspector with respect to labeling it and any other issue around regulation of food. So the effective dates for most foods for Safe Food for Canadians are July. That has been delayed because of COVID. And also for this nutritional labeling, they put in a 5-year implementation. So they've been talking about this already for a number of years. So it's been on the go. They're fairly lenient in terms of bringing it into effect. So it's December 2021 when this will be finalized. And there may be some changes to that, and I'll talk about that later. So, Aaron, if you could flip us on to the next one, that'd be great.
You bet.
Okay, so these are the topics that I'm going to go through in some detail. Labeling is always complicated. Anybody involved in food labeling knows how complicated it can be. I've tried to keep this high level and just distill out the important facts. And so I'll go through the nutrition facts table and the differences from old and new. Ingredient listings, how that, the old and the new, I think is a good way to look at it. Serving size changes. And then there's a huge emphasis on sugars in this whole initiative. So we'll talk about that. And there's a link here to the Health Canada website on food labeling changes. It's actually an excellent piece, easy to read, very informative. And actually there is a wealth of information available on both the Health Canada website and also the CFIA website on labeling requirements. So, of course, there's always detailed questions, and we field quite a few questions where it sometimes gets a little murky. But anyway,
that's putting it politely. Well, it seems like, Cameron, that's it seems it's always left to us to sort of figure out what is meant, right? Like, so it's good. It's good though that we have good partners such as yourself to help us through those. So,
okay. So,
and here's our first example here.
Yeah. We'll start off with the nutrition facts table, and this is the main piece of changes. So you'll see on this slide, hopefully you can all see it reasonably well. The red arrows indicate areas that have changed, and I'll just run through those. So they've tried to make it clearer and easier to read and emphasize certain things. So serving sizes have been standardized, and they stand out much more than they did before. So serving size drives everything on these labels, as you know, and so they've really tried to get more standard serving sizes and have those indicated very boldly on the label, on the table. You'll notice that under calories, they've put a underline, a big black bar and larger font, just so that to drive home how many calories are in the food you're buying. The percent of daily values, a lot of science has changed in the last 20 years. So a lot of those daily values have been updated, and there is guidance available on the Health Canada and CFI websites on those daily values and how they're derived for all kinds of foods. So the information is readily available. You'll see under sugars, and I'll talk a bit more about this halfway down the table, the new table. Not only to declare how much sugar is in the food, but also the percentage of daily value for all the sugars in the food. So this is really intended to drive home that if there's a lot of sugar in the food, it's going to be evident in this label. And that was one of their main policy objectives. Then you'll see in the old one, there was an emphasis on vitamin A and C. They've dropped that entirely because it's just not an issue anymore. Most Canadians, most North Americans get lots of vitamin A and C, and it's not an issue anymore. However, potassium is considered to be for much of the population not getting enough potassium, so that's emphasized in there, and also calcium and iron is put in there. And at the very bottom, there's added guidance for the consumer, and it's very kind of, well, it's not scientifically precise, but it's very helpful guidance. So, for example, if your sugar is at 22% there, and you look down at the bottom, it'll say 15% or more is a lot. So what they're saying is there's a lot of sugar in this particular example. So that is a way to provide guidance. So if it's 5% or less, that's a little sugar. So that's it for the nutrition's table. Those are the main changes. There's been questions. Go ahead, Aaron. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, just a small comment here. I think this is really interesting. One, it does give context to the consumer. What's a little, what's a lot, right? Because that was missing from at least my, when I'm looking at these labels, Cameron, I don't know what 15% is or 5%. I just don't know. So this is really helpful. The other thing to point out here, though, is that when you drop the vitamin A and C, like you said, this gives manufacturers, think about that in the marketing sense, if you've relied on some parts of your labeling to be helpful to sell your product on the shelf, because let's say it has 120% of vitamin C. And if I had to guess, I think this is orange juice, but that's my guess. But if you're not able to sell that 120%, because that's a great thing, it's just going to cause some conversations, and you should have those conversations internally to help understand how this affects your sales.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. I hadn't thought of that. You're right, Aaron. Yeah.
So, and the ingredients, though, go ahead, Cameron. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that we'll move on to ingredients here, and this is I'm not showing the old version. Needless to say, the old version was a lot more complicated and difficult to read. So just on the basics here, they've increased the font size considerably. They require a white or very light background and black print and a black border. And there's been a few questions around that, and they are fairly adamant about the light background, if not white, and it has to be extremely in contrast to the black print. And they want it to be very visible. And then you'll notice that the ingredients and the highlighted ingredients, we'll call it under contains, those are allergens, those are bolded, so that if particularly on the allergen side, it's really important. You see contains, there's wheat and egg, it's very obvious. The big thing, and I'll talk more about this, is that sugars are now grouped. There is no, before, when you looked at a list of ingredients, you'd have maltose, dextrose, fructose, and then it might be a small amount of this, and then some molasses, and then some brown sugar, and it would be distributed all through the list of ingredients. So you couldn't really add up mentally, it's not evident there's a lot of sugars in this food. So this is one of the big policy pushes. Now, this has created some grief for some manufacturers, and in the sense that certain types of things like fruit juices, which add sugar, before they didn't have to be lumped in together with other sugars, and it was a way to sweeten things without saying the word sugar or sugar-like compounds. So that is, I think, probably the biggest difference in this whole thing is how sugars are handled here. Another piece here is that food colors have to be listed in plain common name. They can't be some obscure chemical name that means nothing to anybody. So that's a change as well. And of course, the allergen pieces have to be highlighted. Okay, I think that's it for that one there.
Very good.
Okay, so there's various, these next few slides are all about the complications of various containers and sizes and ways of selling food, and how they, overall, what they're trying to do is make it simpler to compare foods, because it gets, as you know, it can get extremely complicated when you talk about different serving sizes. And so they've tried to standardize and make it easier for the consumer to understand what exactly they're getting. So in this example with milk, what they call the standard serving size is 250 milliliters, or 1 cup. Now, in this case, the new one, if it's under twice the serving size, so 500 mils, in which this case, the one on the new one's on the right is 473 mils. So the nutrition facts are all based on the actual carton size. So that's helpful for the consumer to understand what exactly all these nutrition facts actually mean in relation to the serving size. So that gets a little complicated, but I think it's actually better than it was before, for sure. Okay, now here's an example of foods that can be measured. Before, it was a real mishmash. So at the top you see yogurt A and yogurt B. Here we've got a container that's probably close to 600 grams or something like that, but then they put the nutrition facts are based on half a cup, and then the other one's a much smaller container and they base it on another size. So it was very confusing. You had to do some mental math to make any of this make sense. So in the new one, they've standardized the serving size. So it doesn't matter if you've got a big tub of yogurt or a small one, you're going to know exactly how much per specified volume or weight is there. So that's another way in which they're trying to make sure that the consumer gets good information that's easy to understand and easier to compare. So
yeah, I like how you said that mental math. I've struggled with that a lot.
Yeah. So and now we're talking about things that can be counted or divided. So in this case, it's crackers is the example they use. And it was, again, a mishmash. You didn't know what was comparing to what. And so one company would say, for 12 crackers, another one would be 6 crackers, and the crackers are all different sizes. So you really didn't know what you were talking about or looking at. So now what they've done is they've made standard counts and weights, and so even though the cracker is different size, shape, and so on, you can actually get a sense of how many calories, how much sugar, how much salt, etc., is in a normal serving of these crackers. So again, same, easier to compare initiative. So, and then the next one is bread. So this is typical common foods, and again, it was all over the place. They came with the policy that normal consumption of bread is 2 slices. So now it's 2 slices of the bread and the weight, and then it gives you the nutrition facts for that amount. So it's much easier and better than it was, like the other examples. So that's also an improvement. So I think we can move on. Now, just to emphasize what I was saying about sugars, there's a bit of a repeat of what I was saying before, but in this example, 22% of this food is now identified as being sugars that wasn't there before, and we know that this is a very sugary food in this example, because at the bottom it says 15% or more is a lot. So yeah, I'm kind of repeating what I said earlier, but I think this is the big push that's come on in this whole thing. So we can move to the next one. And again, reinforcing the point that in this example, you can see on the original side, what was happening was that you would have, say, flour as the main ingredient, and then you would have fancy molasses, which is a sugar, and then you go to vegetable oil, shortening, and then, oh, there's another sugar, brown sugar, and then you get some egg in there, and then you come to sugar again. So it's all over the place, so you can't really tell how much sugar and what is actually sugar for some people. So now it's all separated. It's sugars, and then in brackets, and then lists every type of sugar all together, which makes it a lot more clear. Okay, now we'll talk about how this compliance is going to work. They have announced recently that there likely will be a further extension of it another year. So this could potentially take it out to 2022, which is turns out to be actually a 6-year implementation. So any labels made or imported before the final date, maybe. So if you're shipping labels to Canada now under the old rules, that's fine. But if they're imported to Canada after that enforcement date, then they must meet the new requirements. So given the way the industry works and lead times on labels, it's up to 18 months to change a label. So it's good to start thinking about it in 2021 for sure, or even now. Okay, next slide. Okay, so as I said, CFIA will be the folks who enforce these rules. And the way this is going to be enforced for the most part will be under the audits or inspections of the company's preventive control plans. So manufacturers in Canada will get a visit from a CFIA inspector, and they will look at their HACCP plan, their prerequisite programs, their preventive controls, the whole food safety system that they have. But as part of that, labeling compliance is part of that audit, and the nutritional labeling will come under that audit. So that's how they will get at it. For importers, so U.S. product going into Canada, the importers will be the ones who are audited. So in some cases, U.S. companies, of course, can hold a CFIA import license. Only other country that can do that. So many U.S. companies have CFIA import licenses, and a condition of that license is a preventive control plan that must cover off this labeling. So that preventive control plan can be audited by CFIA. Now, in other scenarios, a U.S. company will have either a broker or a distributor or a Canadian company that is the importer of record, in which case, not your problem. It's the issue. Well, it's your problem in the sense that your label has to comply, but the accountability is with the importer in all cases for CFIA. Just to say that most CFIA label inspections are driven by complaints, and that's just because it's a food safety driven organization. A lot of labeling issues are not considered major food safety issues, so it gets dropped a little bit lower on the list of priorities. And so scheduled audits for labeling purposes are fairly rare. They do happen. but really it's often complaints that drive these kinds of things. So that's a whole world unto itself. Companies complain about each other all the time, and CFIA gets involved. Just to say that if there's no complaints, you're probably not going to get a lot of inspection. In most cases where labels are non-compliant, they are given time to correct the labels, unless it's something really egregious like a falsehood or some fraudulent practice, in which case the label will be taken off the market, probably subject to a recall. And significant label violations can result in detention of the product, and also in some cases, if it's fraudulent practices, then there can be charges laid and criminal action taken under the Food and Drugs Act. Okay, I think that's it. Where are we for time?
I think so. We're good. We're good. We've got a bunch of questions too, so I'm hoping we can take a few minutes to tackle a few of these, Cameron, because they are pretty good. And again, with anything, we want to stress, like, we are not the lawyers in the room, right? So there's going to be some things that we can give opinions on, and others where we can give definitive sort of information on. So
yeah.
So the first one came in really quick. Neil asked, does the proposed rule to advance traceability of foods apply to animal food or pet food, right? That if they contain those items. So where's the crossover for the pet food industry?
Yes, they do. I honestly, I better be careful what I say, because I'm not 100% sure that it applies to pet food. I think it does, but I'll have to get back on that. But on the first part of the question, if I understand it correctly, if the foods, like, say you see cheese is on the list. So if you've got a product that's got cheese in it, you have to also have the traceability for that, because cheese is a component of that food. You have to have traceability for the cheese. So yes, it does apply to the ingredients as well, as I understand it. Now, we've only had this proposed rule for a few days, so we're still evaluating it. That's our interpretation, is that it includes the ingredients as well.
Yeah, and I think that that's a good standard just practice for risk mitigation, which is when in doubt, right? Like, so you can just kind of put that on the risk scale and go that route. But that's a great question, and might be worth some follow-up. So another question, Cameron, came in, and this is actually a good one. If there is only one sugar in the ingredients, let's say it's the fancy molasses and nothing else in that example, does sugars need to be plural? Or can it be sugar, right? So do you add the S when there's more than one type of sugar in the ingredient?
No, I don't think you need the S.
Yeah.
That's something I don't think CFI is going to get too fussed about, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Okay. And I think
sugar or sugar. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Another question about sugars, since we're there. Do dried fruit inclusions added for flavor, labeling, and color need to be grouped into the sugars group? So depending on what the use of the ingredient is, as I'm reading this, right? So is there any guidance so far on that?
I mean, I would first have to say I would have to see the exact fruit and what it is and what format, what percentage of the food it is, and why it's in the food. Is it blueberries because this is a blueberry muffin, or is it blue? In other cases, like that's a core ingredient that's on the label, and it characterizes the food. Whereas sometimes fruit juices are put in not because they're calling it a fruit juice or anything. It's just the goal is to make it sweeter by using a natural sugar. And those need to get counted in the sugar component. So it's hard for me to give a really definitive answer, but I certainly welcome a question about a detail if I had a bit more information. So sorry, I'm not 100% giving an answer, but it really depends on what the compound is and what its intended use is.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fair. We're going to keep with the sugars. We're making it sweet today, Cameron. Another question, and this one's a little hard to decipher for myself, so I apologize to Maria if I butcher this one. But in this example, and if I were to go back to the example, and I can in a second, in order to include the molasses powder in the group sugars, would I add the sub ingredients within the sugars grouping? I wasn't sure how to do this. So, and this was if I go back really quick here. Here we go. That's about the best one, and I apologize for the blurriness here. In order to include the molasses powder, now there isn't any molasses powder in this example, and that's why I wasn't sure if Maria, this is the fancy molasses, but in her question, would she add the sub-ingredients within the sugars grouping if she had to include molasses powder?
Oh, boy.
I'm asking the hard one.
I'll have to take that offline because I'm not familiar with molasses powder, to be perfectly honest, and I would like to know a bit more about it and what other ingredients might be in that molasses powder. I can certainly get an answer for Maria, sometime next week, or today's Friday, so it'll be next week. Yeah.
Yes.
And any additional detail that Maria can provide would be helpful.
Yeah.
But I don't.
Excellent.
If the sub ingredient, just as a general shot at answering the question, is if these are very minor ingredients in this molasses powder, then they wouldn't have to be declared.
Yes. Okay, good. There is a correction. And thank you for Yvonne out there for pointing this out. I was going to say this one right here will give you a 404, and I wasn't sure if it was on the website issue or not. However, we're going to update this before we send it out to everyone. There is an update to this website. So thanks for that, for the ever diligent audience. I appreciate the help there. So there's a lot of questions overall about the serving sizes, right? And I think I'm going to try as best as I can to synthesize a few of them into one, which is there any guidance yet, Cameron, on the standard serving sizes? So if you think about it, in our audience right now, there's pasta manufacturers, there's breads, there's cereals, like all these different. Is there going to be some guidance on how to correctly pose the serving sizes?
Yes, and actually that guidance is available. If I can send you, Aaron, the link to where that's available.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yes, that definitely is available.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. All right. Great. And we got another question here, and I think we'll try and wrap it up. So what does the new footnote pertain to? So we are talking about, and I'm going to try and go back to this, to a little or a lot. Is this only for sugar content? Oop, I'm going to go the wrong way here.
No, it's for down everything.
Here. Yeah. Okay. So the standard then, Cameron, go ahead.
So I was just going to say the daily value. So that is an important thing to know, what the daily value is for any particular food, and that information is also available. And the little footnote there, that's based on the daily value. So if you've got potassium, instead of using a sugar example, I use potassium. So it's at 10% of the daily value. So that is, somewhere between 5 and 15. So it's a medium amount of potassium that's available in this particular food. So that's the logic of it. It's a percent of the daily value, and then you say 5 or 15 is a lot or a little.
Yeah, and that's a good point to make, because then that makes no matter what the ingredient is, no matter what percentage the ingredient constitutes that daily average, well, it's always going to be 5 and 15. 5 or less is a little, 15 and more is a lot, correct?
Yeah, and it's very general guidance, but it's still helpful for sure.
Excellent. Cameron, there's so many questions. We had a great group here today. I just want to wrap it up a little bit by saying there are a lot more resources. We've got some future events. Please, Cameron was very kind and gave his email for if you need any additional help there. The Atchison Group, they are the go-to folks for sure. The next FSMA Friday we have scheduled for October 30th, so right before Halloween. Talking about CBDs, getting back into that a little bit with Eric Edmonds. And again, if you can, spread the word. There's a lot of stuff going on. Complexity is increasing. Tell people to go get into FSMA Friday on the LinkedIn group, right? Have them join us. If you know somebody that isn't coming to these or could get use out of them, please do. Remember, everyone on the phone every time gets a link to the recording and they get the slides. And so we will make sure we update those slides before we get them out. Thank you again for that observant person. And Cameron, very nice. Thank you very much for joining us today. And I know we'll be having you on again soon. Until then, have a good fall there in Quebec, and we'll wrap that up for now. Okay?
Thank you. All right. Thanks, Aaron, and thanks everyone for listening. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Right. All right. Cheers. And that'll conclude today's FSMA Friday. Everyone take care and have a great weekend.
Bye.